Hey guys, tonight we dive into a topic that might just blow your mind, or at least your scalp. The curious traditions of Viking hair care. Picture yourself trudging through a damp, windswept fjord, the cold biting your cheeks, but your hair, immaculately braided, gleaming with oils, defying the weather like a warrior's badge of honor. Vikings didn't just ignore hygiene or run around looking like they'd wrestled a bear and lost. Their hair rituals were serious business woven deep into their culture and identity. You probably won't survive this if you think of Vikings as just scruffy, dirty marauders. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments because whether you're lounging in a cozy apartment or braving the Arctic chill, this story is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start with the understanding that Viking hair care wasn't just about looking good, it was a daily ritual tightly connected to identity status and even spirituality. Imagine running your fingers through hair, treated with oils made from natural ingredients, the scent lingering softly even in battle. Vikings saw their hair as an extension of themselves, whether long and braided or cropped short. It spoke volumes before they even said a word. Historical records and archaeological finds show that hair grooming was an essential part of Viking life. Comb sets made from bone and antler were common, and some Vikings carried them everywhere, sort of like ancient pocket tools. These combs were often finely crafted, sometimes even intricately decorated, indicating pride in appearance was not just vanity but a social statement. Vikings used combs not only to detangle but also to remove lice and other pests, an early form of hygiene that some might find surprisingly meticulous for a society often portrayed as wild barbarians. But here's a quirky twist: historians still argue whether Vikings used special hair oils infused with herbs for health and scent, or if these were simply practical lubricants to protect hair from harsh weather. Some evidence suggests infusions of juniper berries and even crushed flowers might have been applied, but the details remain murky. As you trace your fingers through your own hair, tonight consider how those strands might connect you to an ancient ritual that was as much about community and self-respect as it was about survival. Remember, your hair today carries echoes of those old Scandinavian forests and fjords where appearance and personal care were anything but boring. Now that you've settled into the world where Viking hair care is a ritual as sacred as any feast or battle, let's zoom in on the humble tools that made it all possible. You might be picturing rough hands wrestling unruly hair with anything handy, but Vikings were surprisingly skilled artisans when it came to their grooming gear. The comb, for example, was an everyday essential, but far from a simple plastic affair. These combs were typically carved from bone, antler, or wood, often crafted with such care that they could easily be mistaken for small works of art. Some even had delicate carvings of animals or Nordic patterns, showing a blend of practicality and aesthetics. These combs were sturdy, designed not only to detangle but also to hunt down and remove lice. Yes, lice were a Viking problem too, despite their fierce reputation. In fact, archaeologists have found these combs in Viking graves, indicating they were treasured personal items. You can almost picture a Viking sitting by the fire, running one of these combs through their long hair, the worn teeth smoothing knots, while also performing a subtle act of hygiene. The meticulousness is a stark contrast to the modern stereotype of Vikings as wild and dirty. Plus, historians still argue whether these combs doubled as status symbols. Did a finely carved comb mark a wealthy warrior, or were they just practical tools available to all? Beyond combs, Vikings also used small knives or scrapers, known as strigil, to help clean the scalp. These tools might sound a bit medieval spa treatment, but they were effective in scraping off dead skin and buildup, helping maintain scalp health. Imagine using a tiny curved blade to gently sweep away flakes and dirt. It's surprisingly sophisticated. Oddly enough, Vikings sometimes carried miniature grooming kits, including tweezers for removing stray hairs or splinters, showing their commitment to neatness. Some of these kits have been uncovered in archaeological digs, revealing the level of care given to personal grooming. Here's a quirky detail: combs were sometimes considered lucky charms or tokens of protection carried by Vikings during voyages and battles. The idea of a comb warding off evil spirits might sound like a stretch, but in a culture rich with superstition, it's plausible. So your own hairbrush might not protect you from Vikings, but theirs held a kind of spiritual significance. These grooming tools weren't just for vanity, they were essential instruments woven into daily life, a tactile link between personal care and cultural identity. They reveal how Vikings balanced practicality with symbolism, combining artistry and hygiene in ways that still surprise modern historians. You might be wondering, how exactly did Vikings clean their hair shampoo, as we know it was centuries away, and yet they managed to keep their locks surprisingly fresh. The Viking approach to hair washing is a blend of practicality, resourcefulness, and a little mystery that historians are still scratching their heads over. Most likely, Vikings didn't lather up with soap bars full of synthetic chemicals, but instead turned to natural alternatives. One common method was rinsing hair with water heated in wooden tubs, often from rivers or collected rainwater. But water alone wouldn't cut through the grime of days spent outdoors. So they likely relied on natural saponins, plant-based substances that produce a mild lather. Plants like soapwort or horse chestnut might have been boiled to create gentle cleansing infusions. Here's where things get intriguing. Evidence suggests Vikings may have used fermented herbs or even ash to clean their hair. Wood ash, rich in alkaline compounds, can act like a natural soap. Imagine scrubbing your scalp with a gritty mixture that's more eco-friendly than anything you've tried in your bathroom. This method wasn't unique to Vikings, but was common in many ancient cultures. The gritty texture might sound off-putting, but it probably helped remove oils and dirt effectively. Historians still argue whether Vikings also used animal fats or oils as part of their hair care routine. Some suggest that oils helped condition hair, protect it from cold weather, and even add shine. Whale oil or fish liver oil could have been rubbed into the strands, acting as both a moisturizer and a natural barrier against harsh Scandinavian climates. If you've ever tried leaving your hair damp in a windy cold, you get why some oily protection would be handy. There's also a fringe theory that Vikings used mixtures infused with herbs like juniper, lavender, or rosemary, not only for scent, but for their antimicrobial properties. While direct evidence is thin, these plants grow wild in Nordic regions and would have been easily accessible. Imagine a Viking shampoo made from boiled pine needles, leaving hair smelling fresh while fending off scalp irritations. Pretty fancy for a bunch of seafarers, right? Oddly enough, despite their reputation for being rough and tumble, Vikings bathed more regularly than many of their contemporaries. Bathhouses existed especially in wealthy settlements where they could wash hair properly. This challenges the popular myth that Vikings were dirty barbarians. In fact, cleanliness was linked to social status and respectability. So, while historians still debate the exact recipes Vikings used for shampooing, one thing's clear: hair hygiene was taken seriously. Whether it was water ash, herbal infusions, or oils, Vikings managed to keep their hair battle-ready and fresh-smelling, an essential part of their identity. As your fingers trace the imaginary braids of a Viking warrior, you step into a world where hair wasn't just styled, it was coded language. Braids and beards spoke louder than words, signaling everything from tribal affiliation to marital status. Vikings didn't just throw their hair into any old shape. These styles were deliberate, meaningful, and sometimes downright intimidating. Braids were more than decorative. They were practical, keeping long hair manageable during battle or labor, but also a symbol of social identity. Warriors favored intricate patterns, sometimes weaving in small pieces of metal or beads, demonstrating not only skill but also status. Imagine the time and patience it took to create these elaborate styles, possibly by trusted family members or companions. The craftsmanship was an art form, and the finished product a mark of pride. Beards were equally important, with variations from short and groomed to long and flowing. In Viking culture, a well-kept beard was a sign of masculinity and wisdom. Some men even curled their beards or braided them in patterns echoing their hair. A warrior's beard was a visual declaration of strength, maturity, and social standing. Conversely, shaving the beard could be a sign of mourning or ritual purity, highlighting how closely hair was tied to emotional and cultural expression. Here's a quirky fact. Historians still argue whether Vikings ever used heated tools like rudimentary curling irons to shape their hair and beards. Some accounts from later medieval times mention heated tongs, but archaeological evidence is sparse. Still, it's fun to picture a Viking hairstylist wielding a hot iron to give a client those perfectly curled beard tips. Braiding wasn't limited to men. Viking women also wore their hair in complex braids, sometimes adorned with brooches or ribbons. Braids could signify marital status or even regional origin. For example, a woman's hairstyle in one settlement might be a clear indicator of where she came from or which clan she belonged to. It was a subtle social language woven into strands of hair. And then there's the battlefield superstition. Some Vikings believed that hair worn loose was vulnerable while braids offered spiritual protection. Braided hair was thought to confuse evil spirits or make it harder for enemies to grab during a fight. So a tight braid wasn't just practical, it was a kind of magical armor. This intertwining of utility, identity, and belief in hairstyling is a key part of Viking culture that's often overlooked. Today, when you see braids or styled beards, you might be channeling an ancient tradition rooted in symbolism and self-expression. Vikings didn't just care about their looks, they crafted an entire language of hair that spoke of who they were inside and out. Now that you've got the braids and beards sorted, let's dig into the less glamorous but equally important world of scalp health. You might think Vikings with all their hard living would have suffered from flaky, itchy scalps, but evidence suggests they had some pretty effective natural remedies to keep things in check. A healthy scalp was essential not only for comfort, but also for appearance and social standing. Imagine trying to impress your fellow warriors or potential mates with flakes drifting off your shoulders like snow. Definitely not the Viking way. So, how did they deal with dandruff, dry scalp, or even infections? One popular method was the use of natural oils and herbal infusions applied regularly to soothe and nourish the scalp. Oils derived from animal fats, fish livers, or plants like birch and pine were commonly used. These oils acted as moisturizers, preventing dryness caused by harsh Nordic weather and frequent washing. The scent of pine or birch sap lingering on the scalp was a subtle but constant reminder of nature's healing power. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Viking scalp treatments might have included ground-up insects or even crushed minerals, odd by today's standards, but quite common in ancient medicinal recipes. The use of crushed ants, for example, was believed to stimulate circulation in the scalp and promote healthy hair growth. Historians still debate whether such practices were widespread or limited to specific regions. In addition to oils, Vikings likely used rinses made from natural antiseptics. Juniper berries, nettles, and rosemary, which grow abundantly in Scandinavia, were boiled into tonics that helped reduce scalp irritation and control lice infestations. The antimicrobial properties of these plants made them effective and accessible treatments. Speaking of lice, Vikings were known to combat these persistent pests with mechanical methods as well. Those finely crafted combs from earlier, they were indispensable in painstakingly removing lice eggs and nits, which could otherwise cause severe itching and infection. Archaeologists have found lice eggs trapped in the teeth of Viking combs, revealing just how much care was invested in maintaining a healthy scalp. Interestingly, some Viking texts and sagas mention a ritual of rubbing wool or animal fur over the scalp, an odd practice that might have helped exfoliate dead skin or simply feel soothing. The sensory experience of this, combined with the rhythmic motion, likely offered a calming, almost meditative moment in a hard day. So while Vikings may have faced the same scalp challenges we do, their approach was deeply connected to the natural world around them, blending practical remedies with a touch of ritual. Their scalp care was a subtle but crucial part of the larger tapestry of Viking hair traditions, showing a commitment to health and appearance that challenges the rough-and-ready stereotype. You're halfway through this journey, and now it's time to explore the more colorful side of Viking hair care, the dyes and decorations that made their hairstyles stand out like flags on a ship's mast. Vikings weren't shy about using hair as a canvas for self-expression, whether to dazzle friends or intimidate enemies. Let's start with hair dye. Contrary to popular belief, Vikings were not just rocking their natural hues. They often used natural dyes derived from plants, minerals, and sometimes even insects to change or enhance their hair color. Henna, a reddish dye made from plants, was one option, lending fiery tresses that could glow in the Nordic sun. Another popular choice was a yellowish dye made from the bark of alder trees or from chamomile flowers, which lightened hair in a way somewhat like modern highlights. But here's a quirky detail: some accounts suggest Vikings even used more unusual ingredients like ground beetles or lichens to create different shades. Historians still argue whether these dyes were common among all Vikings or mostly among the elite who could afford such treatments. It's fascinating to imagine a Viking chief striding into battle with bright bold hair, signaling his fierce reputation. Besides, dye Vikings often decorated their hair with beads, metal rings, and even small pieces of carved bone or amber. These embellishments were carefully woven into braids and beards, catching the light and adding a layer of complexity to their appearance. The choice of decoration was deeply personal, but also a public statement. Some beads indicated wealth, others hinted at accomplishments or tribal affiliation. And there's a fun, almost theatrical side to it. Warriors sometimes added feathers or animal teeth to their hair and beards before battle. These fierce accessories weren't just for show. They were believed to channel the strength and spirit of the animals. They represented a sort of hair-borne talisman. Imagine charging into a clash, your beard jingling with tiny bone charms, and feathers embodying the wild power of a raven or wolf. Decorative hair was also an indicator of gender roles and age. Young women might wear more delicate, colorful beads, while older men favored sturdy metals or symbolic tokens. The styles changed over time and place, reflecting shifting fashions and cultural influences, much like today. So Vikings didn't just accept their natural hair colors, they actively shaped and enhanced their appearance with a surprising range of dyes and decorations. This colorful tradition shows how hair care was as much about storytelling and identity as hygiene, weaving together beauty, power, and symbolism in every strand. You're getting cozy now, and it's time to challenge one of the biggest myths about Vikings: that they never bathed. Picture this: cold, damp Scandinavian air, thick woolen clothes, and yet Vikings made bathing a regular and even somewhat luxurious habit. Their hair care was naturally tied to these bathing routines, which were more frequent and sophisticated than many give them credit for. Contrary to the dirty barbarian stereotype, archaeological evidence reveals that Vikings often bathed weekly, sometimes more often if they lived near water sources. Bathhouses called saunas or sweat baths were common in Viking settlements. These weren't just places to scrub off grime, but also social hubs where people gathered to relax, exchange news, and yes, wash their hair thoroughly. Historians still argue whether all Vikings had equal access to these baths, or if they were mostly privileges of the wealthy and elite. But even the common folk made use of natural bodies of water, rivers, lakes, and the sea for regular cleansing rituals. Imagine dunking your head in icy water, then warming up by a fire, your hair dripping but clean, the steam softening your scalp. One quirky detail is the Viking use of hot stones in bathhouses to generate steam, an early form of sauna. This steam opened pores and loosened dirt, making hair washing and scalp treatment more effective. Bathhouses sometimes had benches lined with birch branches, which were used to gently beat the skin and perhaps even massage the scalp, stimulating blood flow and relaxation. The bathing routine was often paired with hair care rituals using those natural oils and infusions we mentioned earlier. After washing, Vikings might apply conditioning oils or herbal rinses to keep hair soft and healthy. This multi-step process wasn't just hygiene, it was self-care, a way to prepare for social interaction or battle. Interestingly, bathing and grooming were sometimes seen as acts of spiritual purification. Cleanliness was linked to morality and honor, making hair care a sacred practice. A dirty or unkempt Viking could face social ridicule or be seen as lacking discipline, which was crucial in a culture that prized strength and order. So next time you skip a shower, think about Vikings immersing themselves regularly in icy waters, steam rooms, and natural oils, an ancient routine that balances practicality, social norms, and even a touch of ritual. Their commitment to cleanliness and hair care was a subtle but essential part of their culture, proving that even fierce warriors had a softer, cleaner side. You're deep into this hair care saga, and now it's time to discover how hairstyles played a vital role in battle, not just for looks, but for survival. Vikings didn't go to war with messy hair, flying wild like some Hollywood extras. Their hair was strategic, practical, and sometimes downright superstitious. Long hair and beards, as you've learned, were often braided tightly before battle to keep hair out of the way and prevent enemies from grabbing it. Loose hair in combat was a liability. Imagine swinging a sword while your hair whips around your face, or worse, an opponent yanking it to gain advantage. A tightly braided warrior was a more formidable opponent. But beyond practicality, Vikings believed that certain hairstyles offered spiritual protection. Braids were thought to confuse evil spirits or curses, acting like a magical armor woven into the strands. Some warriors reportedly incorporated charms or talismans into their braids, believing these items could protect them from harm or enhance their strength. The line between practicality and superstition was often blurry. Here's a quirky historical debate. Historians still argue whether Vikings sometimes shaved parts of their heads or styled their hair to intimidate enemies psychologically. Some accounts describe warriors shaving the sides of their heads, leaving a long strip of hair in the middle, something like a proto-mohawk. Whether this was widespread or ceremonial remains unclear, but the idea of using hair to unsettle foes is certainly plausible. Battle-ready hair care also extended to beards. Some warriors trimmed their beards short or braided them tightly, avoiding the risk of beard pulling in close combat. Others grew long, wild beards to appear more fearsome, thinking their untamed looks might intimidate opponents. This balance between appearance and function was a personal and tactical choice. Another practical hair care tactic was keeping hair clean and free of lice before battle. An itchy, irritated scalp was the last thing a warrior needed. Those specialized combs, oils, and washes weren't just vanity, they were essential for focus and comfort during the chaos of battle. So, Viking hair in combat was far from an afterthought. It was carefully managed for function, protection, and psychological impact. Whether woven with charms or shaved for intimidation, hair was another weapon in the Viking arsenal, silently influencing the battlefield long before swords clashed. Continuing to unravel the strands of Viking hair care, you find yourself contemplating the differences and surprising similarities between how men and women manage their locks. Viking hair wasn't just a man's game. Women also invested considerable effort and meaning into their hairstyles, and these practices reflected broader cultural ideas about gender. Women's hairstyles were often elaborate, involving multiple braids woven together or styled into intricate buns, sometimes adorned with jewelry or ribbons. These styles were not only aesthetic but could signal marital status, fertility, or even wealth. For instance, a married woman might wear her hair in a particular way, distinct from that of a young maiden, much like a social badge that communicated her place in society without a single word. Interestingly, while men's hair might be styled for battle and intimidation, women's hair care involved rituals connected to fertility and protection. Some Viking texts hint at women using herbs and oils not just for shine, but as charms to ward off evil spirits and ensure a safe pregnancy. The hair in this sense was both a physical attribute and a spiritual tool. Men's grooming, on the other hand, leaned heavily toward signaling strength, maturity, and social rank through beard styles, braids, and sometimes even partial shaving. But the tools and products often overlapped. Both genders used similar combs, oils, and rinses, pointing to shared knowledge of hair care, even if the social meanings diverged. Here's a scholarly debate for you. Historians still argue whether Viking women were more active participants in hairdressing, often styling their own hair, or whether specialized hairdressers or family members performed these duties. Some archaeological findings suggest that grooming was a communal affair with women, helping each other prepare for important events, weaving bonds as well as braids. And a quirky detail, some Viking women reportedly colored their hair with natural dyes like henna, the same as men, challenging modern assumptions that hair dye was a purely masculine or purely feminine practice. This blurring of gendered hair care shows how Vikings might have viewed beauty and self-expression more fluidly than later societies. So whether you imagine yourself as a Viking shield maiden or a sturdy warrior, hair was a crucial part of expressing identity, gender roles, and social relationships. It wasn't just a style choice, but a language woven in strands, binding men and women to their culture and each other in intricate, meaningful ways. As you keep untangling the story, you realize Viking hair care was deeply tied to social status, making your hairstyle a silent but powerful statement. Hair wasn't just about cleanliness or fashion, it was a way to broadcast your rank, wealth, and power within the Viking hierarchy. High-ranking Vikings often had access to the finest grooming tools and rare ingredients for hair treatments. Imagine a wealthy chieftain with combs carved from polished bone or ivory, possibly inlaid with precious metals or decorated with intricate designs. These weren't everyday objects, they were status symbols showing off wealth and craftsmanship. The time and resources devoted to hair care reflected not only personal pride but social position. Similarly, hair dye and decorations could signal rank. Brightly colored hair or elaborate beads and metalwork were markers of elite status, making you stand out in a crowd or on the battlefield. Wearing certain styles or colors might even have been restricted to nobles or warriors of particular clans. This control over appearance was a subtle but effective way to maintain social order. Historians still argue about how rigid these hair care class distinctions were. Could a commoner imitate the styles of a noble to gain respect? Or were there clear rules policing who could wear what? Archaeological evidence suggests some crossover, but the consensus is that status did play a significant role in hair grooming practices. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Viking combs found in graves have inscriptions or runes, possibly magical or protective, in nature reserved for those of higher status. These personal grooming items became talismans, blending social identity with spiritual belief. Even burial practices reveal how hair care reflected status. High-status Vikings were often buried with their grooming kits, indicating the importance of hair rituals in both life and death. In contrast, common folk might lack such elaborate grave goods, underlining differences in social standing. So your hairstyle in Viking society was a quiet proclamation of who you were, a blend of wealth, power, and identity that spoke before you even lifted your axe. The strands you wore connected you not just to yourself but to a larger social tapestry woven with tradition and hierarchy. You're now stepping into the world where Viking hair care transcends the mortal realm, weaving its way into myth and legend. Hair wasn't just a mundane aspect of daily grooming, it was a symbol charged with divine power and heroic identity. Consider the gods and heroes of Norse mythology, whose hair was often described with almost supernatural qualities. Thor, the thunder god, was depicted with a fiery red beard, embodying his fierce strength and temper. Odin's long hair and beard symbolized wisdom and mystery, while the goddess Freya's golden locks were tied to fertility and beauty. These iconic images were more than just poetic, they shaped how Vikings themselves approached their hair. There's an open debate among scholars about how much myth influenced real-life hair care practices. Did Vikings style their hair to emulate their gods? Or did the gods' appearances reflect the hairstyles common in Viking society? The line blurs, but it's clear that hair served as a conduit between human and divine realms. Quirky detail. Alert: some legends mention heroes whose hair granted them special powers or protection. For example, the story of a warrior whose strength depended on the length of his hair echoes similar tales in other cultures like Samson. Whether these myths influenced hair care or vice versa remains a fascinating question historians still ponder. In addition to gods, legendary warriors and sagas often emphasize hair as a marker of honor and identity. Losing one's hair or beard in battle was seen as a deep dishonor, while maintaining them was a sign of resilience and pride. The visual impact of flowing hair in epic tales underscored themes of vitality and heroism. So the hair you imagined styling tonight isn't just a modern fashion statement, it's part of an ancient continuum where strands connected mortals to their gods and stories. Your hair carries echoes of those fiery red beards and golden braids, symbols of strength, wisdom, and beauty woven into the fabric of Viking myth and memory. As you cozy up to the Viking story, it's time to bust some myths swirling around their hair and hygiene. You've heard the usual tale: Vikings were filthy barbarians, never bathed, and certainly didn't care for their hair. Well, prepare to have those stereotypes brushed away like yesterday's dandruff. Firstly, Vikings were surprisingly clean for their era. Archaeological finds of combs, grooming kits, and bathhouses contradict the smelly marauder image. Historians still argue whether this reputation is a result of later medieval propaganda or simple misunderstanding. But the evidence leans heavily towards Vikings valuing cleanliness and appearance. One persistent myth is that Vikings never cut their hair, that they grew it wild and untamed as a sign of ferocity. In reality, haircuts and trims were common, with styles changing according to age, status, and occasion. Some sagas even describe elaborate haircuts and beard trims before major battles or social events, emphasizing neatness and order. Another quirky misconception is that Vikings used bizarre or dangerous substances on their hair like crocodile dung as sunscreen, or wild concoctions that would peel your scalp. While some ancient cultures did use peculiar ingredients, Vikings stuck mostly to natural herbs, oils, and ashes, which were safe and effective. Historians debate how much their grooming habits influenced later European standards. Some argue Vikings were trendsetters for hygiene in Northern Europe, setting a higher bar for cleanliness compared to their neighbors. Others suggest their practices were more regional and sporadic. Also, contrary to myth, Vikings were not just concerned with men's hair. Women's grooming was equally important and sophisticated, reinforcing the idea that Viking society, while warrior-based, valued order and personal care. So next time you hear the dirty Viking trope, remember these facts: they were more hygienic, stylish, and sophisticated than the caricatures suggest. Their hair care was part of a broader cultural emphasis on cleanliness, identity, and even respect, proving that appearances do matter even in the harsh north. You're getting closer to the heart of Viking hair care, and now it's time to look at what archaeology has uncovered about their grooming habits. Comb sets, brushes, and other artifacts give us tangible clues about how Vikings managed their hair and reveal some surprising details about their daily lives. One of the most common finds are finely crafted combs made from bone, antler, or wood. These weren't just rough tools. Many were beautifully decorated with intricate patterns or animal motifs, showcasing skilled craftsmanship. These combs often had both wide and narrow teeth, perfect for detangling and removing lice or dirt, demonstrating a dual purpose of care and hygiene. Interestingly, archaeologists have found grooming kits that included tweezers, ear picks, and small knives alongside combs. These multi-purpose sets suggest Vikings took personal grooming seriously, addressing everything from hair care to basic hygiene in one portable package. Imagine carrying your grooming kit like a modern-day toiletry bag. Vikings were practical in every way. There's also evidence of specialized tools possibly used for hair dyeing or styling, such as small containers that might have held herbal mixtures or oils. Although direct proof is scarce, these artifacts hint at more complex hair care routines than previously thought. A quirky detail is that Viking grooming tools have been found not just in homes but also in burial sites. Including these items in graves indicates their importance in life and perhaps in the afterlife, symbolizing identity and status. Some graves even contained combs with runic inscriptions, believed to offer protection or good fortune. Historians still debate whether all Vikings had access to these grooming tools or if they were mostly the domain of wealthier individuals. However, the widespread discovery of such artifacts across Scandinavian settlements suggests grooming was a common practice transcending social classes. These archaeological finds offer a tactile connection to Viking daily life, shedding light on how they balanced practicality, artistry, and social meaning in something as seemingly simple as combing their hair. You've journeyed through the history and myth of Viking hair care, and now you might be wondering, does any of this ancient tradition ripple into modern hair trends? Surprisingly, the influence of Viking grooming practices has quietly threaded its way into today's styles and culture. Consider the resurgence of braids and beards. In recent years, hipsters sporting braided beards, influencers flaunting Nordic-inspired braids, and men embracing long hair once more. These trends echo Viking aesthetics consciously or not. The rugged yet refined look, mixing practicality with artistry, resonates with modern ideals of masculinity and individuality. Some modern hairstylists and barbers even draw direct inspiration from Viking styles, offering braid patterns and beard trims reminiscent of ancient Nordic warriors. The use of natural oils and balms in contemporary grooming mirrors the Viking practice of conditioning hair to protect it from the elements, showing a rediscovery of time-tested methods. Historians still debate how much these modern trends are genuine cultural revival versus fashion cycles, recycling old ideas. But the connection is undeniable. Viking hair care, with its blend of symbolism, utility, and aesthetic flair, has left a subtle legacy that continues to inspire. A quirky note: some brands market Viking-style grooming products, often packed with natural ingredients like pine juniper or birch extracts, echoing ancient recipes. Whether these products actually trace back to Viking formulations or are clever marketing, they tap into a cultural fascination with the Viking image. Even in popular media, Vikings are portrayed with stylized hair and beards, influencing public perception and personal grooming choices worldwide. This cultural feedback loop reinforces the allure of Viking hair as a symbol of strength and authenticity. So the strands you style today may carry whispers from centuries ago, linking you to a tradition that valued hair as a statement of identity, resilience, and artistry. Viking hair care's quiet influence lives on in the textures and styles we choose, blending past and present in every braid and beard. You've reached the final strand of our tale, the legacy of Viking hair care, a quiet but enduring thread woven through centuries. While the Viking age may have ended over a millennium ago, the principles and practices of their hair rituals linger in subtle, fascinating ways. Modern grooming culture's renewed interest in natural oils, handcrafted combs, and elaborate braids echoes the Viking ethos of blending utility with beauty. It's as if their approach to hair care respecting nature's resources, valuing craftsmanship, and tying appearance to identity never fully disappeared, but rather transformed and adapted. Interestingly, in some Nordic communities today, traditional hair care recipes and techniques have been preserved or rediscovered, connecting present generations with their Viking ancestors. Herbal rinses, oil treatments, and braid patterns are passed down a living heritage that honors both practical needs and cultural identity. Historians still debate the extent to which Viking hair care practices influenced other European cultures, but the evidence suggests a ripple effect, ancient Scandinavian styles and grooming habits, subtly shaping trends far beyond their homeland. And here's a cozy tidbit to ponder as you unwind tonight: your hair, whether short or long braided or loose, might carry whispers of those ancient fjords where Vikings crafted their appearance with care, pride, and meaning. Your grooming ritual is part of a long continuum of human expression, connecting you across time. As you prepare to rest, let the image of those wind-swept Viking braids fade softly, reminding you that every strand can tell a story of identity, survival, and artistry. In this way, the spirit of Viking hair care lives on, a timeless tradition woven into the very fabric of who we are. Slow. The pacing soften, vocabulary lengthen sentences. As your eyes grow heavy and the world quiets around you, imagine the gentle touch of cool Nordic breezes weaving through long braids, the faint scent of pine and herbs lingering softly. The rituals of ancient hair care were not just about appearance, but about connection to community, to nature, and to self. Tonight, as you let these stories settle, feel a calmness wrapping around you like a warm cloak, soothing and steady. Let the image of a Viking warrior tending their hair by firelight fade gently into the night, and know that this quiet care has traveled through time to touch you now. Rest easy with the knowledge that in every strand lies a story, a legacy, a quiet strength. Sweet dreams.